So you're finally in on the big talking point for The Last of Us, the first game. The ending. The ending! Fans of the game are waiting for you to catch up. So now we can finally all discuss whether or not we thought Joel was in the right. I think another point of discussion will be whether or not this episode was too darn short. I think it was a scooch too short. We'll talk about that too. But I think obviously the focal point is, do you agree with what Joel did or not? And I do! I feel very strongly about it, in fact. So get ready to hear my in-depth thoughts. I'm going to try and understand the other side of the conversation too, which I do think is interesting. But emotionally, I don't think Joel did anything wrong. And I resent the implication that he did. I resent the show for trying to even sell the idea that he did anything wrong. I mean, it wasn't ideal, I'll admit that, but I think he did the best he can in the time restraints and the restrictions, other restrictions that he had. If Marlene was so sure Ellie would be willing to die to maybe create a cure, the doctor thinks, he thinks, are you kidding me with that? Then maybe Marlene should have asked Ellie. And quite frankly, that's what I would have shot back if I were Joel. Joel was emotionally shattered at the moment because he's a nice guy. But I would have been like, then why didn't you ask her, Marlene? Why didn't you ask her? And quite frankly, that surgeon in Marlene, well, let's just say they should have let Joel go. He didn't hurt those nurses. That surgeon, though, that's going to come back and haunt Joel. That's going to come back and haunt Joel. And they kind of telegraphed that a little bit, well, at least a knowing wink to the fans with that shot. But yes, we're starting to shift into part 2 of our story, which heavily divided fans of the game. Really? You thought the ending of, I think it's actually right up there with the end of Game of Thrones. Although pretty much nobody liked the end of Game of Thrones, where some people did like the second part of this story. And also this ending, the ending of part 1 of The Last of Us kind of started that divisive journey. Because here was the first point where people are like, what? So again, which side are you on? I'm very curious to hear down below. Again, I'm 110% Team Joel. Woohoo, Team Joel, let's make up t-shirts. In fact, I'm so sure he's in the right that I don't understand why he lied to Ellie about what he did. When she woke up in the back of the truck, I'd have been like, guess what? They were gonna kill you. You're welcome. Like, I don't know why he felt he had to lie, quite frankly. Would Ellie have been willing to sacrifice herself for the cure, if asked? That's a tough one. Largely because right after her encounter with David, clearly not the best time to ask her. I'd be like, whoa, she's still emotionally reeling from this incident we just had. I mean, you've waited this long. Can you give her a week? I don't think Marlene would have waited. Marlene really pushed everybody here. You know, I blame Marlene. All right, so anyway, Joel reveals that to try and, like, I think, reach out to Ellie because she's put this emotional wall up. He reveals that after Sarah was killed, he wanted to go. He was like, just like everybody else on this show, he'd had enough. He was like, I don't want to be here by myself. Or at least he thought he did, because a part of him flinched when he pulled that trigger. But the reveal is that he's the guy who shot and missed. He gave himself that scar, which I don't really feel we've ever seen. They're like, oh yeah, do you have a scar? I mean, the most I remember is that he can't hear very well on one side, kind of. It's only been used once or twice, but that's all because he tried to do that to himself. But Joel says that with time, 20 years, that's not quite the pep talk I think he's hoping for. That's why I didn't put a number on it. But he's like, you'll find something new to live for, as I did. And he's talking, of course, about Ellie. And he's confident that she'll find something new too. And, he's not wrong. But at that moment, I think it seems to Ellie impossible. As sure as it would have if anyone tried to talk to Joel right after what happened to Sarah. To me, if only somebody was a therapist. Is anybody here a therapist before the apocalypse? All right, so to me, it just feels like manufactured drama. And again, vilifying Joel, which I don't appreciate. He seems to me like a totally different person this episode, which I think is somewhat intentional because he too is dealing with trauma. But he was even different than he ever acted when we saw him with Sarah, at the beginning of the show. He was never this way even with Sarah. I mean, to be honest, this episode, he seems a little unhinged, no longer in control. And I don't like that either. I'm like, Joel, I think he should own the decision that he made. He didn't lose his mind. He wasn't out of control. I think he made a decision. And I think that one of the things that Ellie admires in Joel and that we do, many of us do, is that he has that element of control. That, he is the master of his own fate, so to speak. Of course, everybody has like moments of weakness. I guess you could say this is supposed to be one of them, but to see him lose that quality is jarring and sad. And I don't think they really sold me on it either. I felt it was a narrative tool used by the creators to create this conundrum to divide fans and create this ethical question. So I don't like that, because I'm like, you assassinated Joel in the process. Character assassination. But there's a desperation that not only changes him, but I think changes his relationship with Ellie. Because even when they're hiking back to the commune, after it's all said and done, he starts talking about Sarah, comparing Ellie and Sarah. Never do that! Never do that. Like, I'm glad he feels he can talk about Sarah now, because remember before he was like, don't you even mention her name. But now he's like, you want to hear about Sarah again? And Ellie's like, oh no, I do not. I'm sorry I opened this door, this floodgate, because it is a flood of emotion. And again, maybe it's natural that after not talking about Sarah for so long, it would be an emotional flood, right? A flood of emotions. But maybe he also feels guilty about what he just did. So he's trying to make both of them feel better. He's like, oh yeah, I did it because I knew I couldn't save Sarah, but at least I saved you. But I think from Ellie's perspective, and really Bella Ramsey did such a great job acting this episode because you can see all this on her face. But from her perspective, I think it really makes it seem like she's competing with a ghost that she can never measure up to. I'm like, Joel, what are you doing? He's like, she was more girly than you and had a killer smile. Not that you're not awesome. You're a hoot. You're a hoot, Ellie. She's like, what? But anyway, so I was like, this is not going well, Joel. But I think it makes Ellie feel that, perhaps she never had a relationship with Joel that existed on its own. Maybe at that moment, Ellie's like, I've always just been a substitute Sarah, and not even a good enough substitute, a substitute in every sense of the word. You're not Sarah, but you're close enough. Like, I think that probably makes Ellie feel a little bit stupid, quite frankly. And more, we'll talk about that in a moment. But I also want to point out, this is an amazing callback to episode 6, where they were at the dam, right? And Ellie jokes, you could have made something up about how a dam works. I'd have believed anything that you said, which of course is the foreshadowing. But I don't even think she believes Joel. More on that in a moment. But first, I think that Ellie asks Joel to swear about what happened with the Fireflies because she needs some reassurance in her own life. Because I think in that moment, she feels she's only existing in the memory of Joel. Again, she's this ghost, she's competing with the ghost of Sarah. So Ellie's like, let's bring it back to my life and what happened to me. Because in that moment, Joel's not only acting weird, but I think because he's so focused on Sarah, I think it makes Ellie call their whole relationship into question. And Ellie probably in that moment has never felt more alone. She's like, wow, this guy's not even actually my friend. When he looked at me this whole time, he just saw his daughter. And she's like, what have I done? And again, I think if you asked her again right here, boy, talk about emotional hits that Ellie's taking. I think if you asked her right here, hey, do you want to sacrifice yourself to be the cure? Become a hero for humanity? Rember how much Ellie admires astronauts and Sally Ride, right? I think that here she might have said yes. And because she has survivor's guilt. She said, it would have been my turn like so many before her, But I think Joel is right. I think it would have been a mistake once she kind of recovered from all this stuff. Don't make these kinds of decisions when you're in a bad emotional state. And Marlene and company have a responsibility to make sure that Ellie is in a sound emotional state when asking her these questions. Again, because I don't even think this was necessary. But hold on. But, in this conversation, Ellie references Riley, tells finally Joel about Riley, and that was her first kill. How tragic is that? But what did Riley want? Riley wanted and inspired Ellie to live as long as possible. So I don't think Riley would have condoned that choice either, for Ellie to sacrifice herself for the cure. So everyone in Ellie's life that she loves, Joel, Riley, is screaming at her, keep going. And I think that's important. This ending of the season is also the ending of the game, by the way. The very conversation, they just flipped who was standing where. And the final line, okay, is right from the game, so fans will like that quite a bit. And again, I think Bella Ramsey in particular knocked out this episode. I think that, again, I think Pedro Pascal was thrown a bit of a loop and that he had to play crazy Joel. He's like, what is my motivation again? And they're like, you've lost your mind. And he's like, okay. But I thought Bella Ramsey, I could understand what was going on in her mind at least. And I thought that was really great. And all this, the nuance and what was being left unsaid, it was just a really fabulous performance. I thought really, really good stuff. Now, to be honest with you, as I said, I suspect she knows Joel is lying to her. And the reason she asks him again is, I think, well, maybe even a third choice. But A, letting him carry that burden for her. She's like, okay, I love that. I love that story for me. Let's go along with that. Or B, making the choice to stay on Team Joel, even if that means being lied to. And C, maybe she was giving him a chance to come clean, because I think the way she said okay, I don't think she believes that story. I don't think in some ways she wants to believe that story. Hold on, I'm putting it all together. I guess I'll say here, I think that Joel's lie made Ellie feel not special when he was like, oh, it turns out there were a bunch of immune people and none of you could help anybody. And she was like, oh, that's why I think she was looking at her arm and stuff like that. Not some great choices were made here. But she did say she'd follow him anywhere, right? Earlier in the episode. But again, you can sense that the hospital siege does drive a wedge between them. And maybe that's not so much the case anymore, that she would follow him anywhere, right? Or maybe she's at least starting to question that allegiance. I think in an ideal situation, yeah, maybe he shouldn't have made, I feel like I'm doing the therapy session for them. So yeah, maybe he shouldn't have made that choice for her. Maybe he should have just insisted that they wake her up and asked her what she wanted to do. Although they wouldn't wake her up. But maybe he should have explained. He'd be like, I just want to know what she thinks. I think she has a right to know the choice the choice can't be made for her by you, Marlene, any more than by me, is what Joel would say. But so I think maybe that's what he obviously should have done. And I don't think he should have used her knife to kill anyone. I was like, that's a step too far. Don't taint the knife. I mean, he obviously doesn't know that it comes from her mother, but still, I'd be like, you're making a really strong choice here, Joel. You don't need to spread it to her. So to me, I don't think there should be a wedge here, because again, I think that he, under the circumstances, he made the only choice that he really could. But there clearly is a wedge there. And I don't think that it's fair to Joel. I don't think it's fair to him in the world of the story. And I don't think it's fair from the outside looking in, from the perspective of fans and the creators. I don't think it's fair to do to that character. And I guess to some degree to his fans, like myself. I'm like, what? But I guess sometimes life isn't fair. As you can see, I'm still wrestling with this, right? And Ellie, I think Ellie is definitely not Sarah. I think Sarah would have totally understood what Joel did, and I don't think he would have felt the need to lie to her, actually, which is interesting. But I think that's fascinating. This drives home that they are definitely not the same person. Maybe that's partially why he starts talking about that on the hike. He's like, wow, she does not seem to be handling this well. I'm not doing as good a job parenting her as I did with Sarah. And maybe by not letting Ellie make the sacrifice, that maybe she would have been okay with it. Maybe. It's like Joel has hijacked her to be Sarah, and Ellie's life is continuing when it shouldn't have, or at least that's how Ellie feels in some ways. Like her story was supposed to end in that hospital, but Joel, because of Sarah, not because of Ellie, yanked her out of that. Now she's just adrift. That's if I were Joel, I'd be a little annoyed that was the stance that Ellie took, but that doesn't mean that's not how Ellie feels. I'd be like, whoa, man, like, why would you take that stance? But sometimes people do. For instance, I recall that one time I met someone who said they'd be happy to eventually leave Earth, to no longer be around, to make room so that other people could be on Earth. And I didn't understand that sentiment whatsoever. But people are different, and that's an important thing to understand in life, to help you understand other people and to not get frustrated and better navigate it. So you have to understand that maybe Ellie would have made that choice, even if she was in a good state of mind. Maybe she would have. But well, we'll talk about that in a second. But I don't think it's fair to vilify Joel because, again, he was put in an impossible situation. And with Ellie about to be killed, he didn't have time to think, but he only had a chance to act. And Marlene certainly wasn't going to play along with, maybe some other scenarios. If Marlene had just asked Ellie what she wanted to do with Joel in the room, this all could have been avoided. I'm not even sure that patrol didn't realize who it was. Part of me thinks that Marlene lied about that, although the Fireflies are horribly incompetent, so perhaps that was true. But I think Marlene, perhaps in her final moments, her regret is that she didn't kill Joel when he was knocked out. She's like, I should have taken them both out. Right? And I guess that's something else that's about the apocalypse. The people who survive are the ones who are the most ruthless. That's interesting too. That's interesting. As I told you, this show surely got me to the emotional state where I'm like, oh yeah, I think this is the right course of action. You pushed my hand. Don't get upset with me for then having to do what we got to do. And sure, Ellie did say that, hey, she said, I don't want to have gone through all this for nothing, right? All this horrible emotional and physical abuse that she's had to suffer, and all the loss that's happened, her loss, the loss of people's lives. She's like, that can't have been for nothing. But we also know for a fact that Ellie never imagined that the cure would cost her life, because what she'd been talking about all the time, what they're going to do next. That was brought up several times. She even says in this very episode that, after this is done, we can do whatever you want. So she felt she had a future. So to be fair to Joel, I think he was going off of that. If Ellie had said, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll do whatever the sacrifice is, whatever, then maybe Joel would have been like, well, Marlene, maybe you're right. But, he's like, I was just talking to Ellie about things, and Ellie had plans. Ellie had plans. So we got to talk to her. I think that, as I said, the biggest mistake on Joel's part might have been within his lie that he made Ellie feel that she wasn't special, that he robbed her of that. That there were others like her, and that none of them could help anyone. And I think that if he had just told her the truth, I think she would have understood, because it did point out, I don't know, again, he really sold it as, I can't lose my replacement Sarah, instead of I can't lose Ellie. And I'd be like, you're going about this the wrong way, man. So I think she would have understood if he told her the truth. To me, the lying, he should have focused on the fact that Marlene was the one who lied. But now he's made it all about how he's told a big lie. And I think that's the one bad thing that Joel does this episode. I feel he didn't even have to lie because he was in the right. But that's where I think he really made a big mistake. And that's unfortunate. So if you have a takeaway from this episode, tell your loved ones the truth. It's always better than the lie. Another reason that I feel this Ellie needs to die for there to be a cure situation is manufactured drama. In other words, not organic and not fair to Joel again, is that I'm not so sure she would have to sacrifice her life for the cure. So Marlene was there at Ellie's birth, right? But she believed Anna's lie. So speaking of lies, she believed Anna's lie that Anna cut the umbilical cord before Anna was infected. So therefore, that's why Ellie didn't turn. Marlene had no idea that Ellie was immune until the beginning of this show when, many years later, Ellie gets bitten and doesn't turn while Riley succumbs to the same situation, right? However, Marlene would therefore then realize, because she obviously put two and two together because she was able to have these discussions with the doctor, the surgeon. So wouldn't that mean that the cure is like most vaccines, where what you need is to expose someone, maybe even at birth, to a very small amount of the harmful substance so that their system can adapt to it? That's what a vaccine in many cases does. So I don't know why they didn't try that route either, right? If Marlene's willing to sacrifice Ellie's life, the daughter of her lifelong friend, who Marlene promised to look after and lied right to Ellie's face about how, oh yeah, we're just going to put you to sleep, you're going to get up again. Why wouldn't she be willing to go and practice with this vaccine idea in the interim? Why would she draw the line there? And also, why does it have to be the strain from Ellie? How have we discovered? I don't believe we've discovered that there are separate strains of cordyceps. Everybody has the same outcome. And then also, it's also been established that all the cordyceps are one giant network. So it wouldn't make sense that there were different strains, quite frankly. So I don't think you need to have, per se, the one from Ellie to start trying to see if you can make this work. Unfortunately, they haven't established whether or not animals can get infected, because then, you could have some maybe more something, a test group that people would be more morally okay with. These are difficult discussions. All right, so anyway, but you got to have them. That's why you had to ask Ellie. And then how about open brain surgery? They do open brain surgery all the time. So you can maybe open Ellie up, take a tiny snippet of the cordyceps that's in her brain without having to dig around in there, right? And then close her back up, and hopefully she's okay. I think there would be a small chance that you would disrupt the delicate balance going on within her, and that maybe if you took out even a snip of the cordyceps in there, it would create, the protection would fall and she would become infected, right? It would then grow within her. But it's a better chance than this plan that they came up with. So I think that would be something that I would find more believable. And then also, what about doing a brain scan first? They were in a major state-of-the-art hospital. They had the ability to do it. They seemed to have power. Yeah, they had power. They had her hooked up to a monitor. Why not do the brain scan and see what you're dealing with here, right? rather than killing Ellie on a theory. The doctor thinks this might be the case. Are you kidding me with this? All right, and I'm not even a doctor. Are you a doctor? Do you know someone who works in the brain area? I mean, I'm sure that there were better alternative paths that they could have taken here. All right, so before we dive back into the season finale, I want to take this is intense, so let's take a breather to talk about some lighthearted, funny stuff when it comes to the VFX. So I've actually watched this episode twice, and the first time that I saw it, the VFX, they had barely started on them. So it was hilarious to see. Oh, it's so fun to watch these things without the VFX completed. Now, at the beginning, when they're at that underpass with the set fully dressed, they plus the sets a little bit with VFX, but it was, mostly that's how it looked even before they did the VFX. But there were a ton of cars going by on the overpass to the point where I was like, wow, they made it. They've made it to civilization. Because, some cars have been used throughout the show. So I was like, wow, there's a bunch of people here. This is so exciting. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Those are cars that need to be taken out in post. And sure enough, the VFX team did an incredible job of not only taking out the cars, but the sound of the cars. Because when you watched it without the VFX work, it was clearly this apocalyptic scene that was shot, I gotta tell you, under a very busy highway. And kudos to the actors too for pulling that off. But, when I watched it again, raw, cars were just going by all the time. You could hear them and it was hilarious. And the giraffe, a much-loved moment from the game that fans were very excited to see brought to life on this show. That giraffe is totally CGI, except in the close-up, where they actually shot that in a totally different location with a real giraffe surrounded by blue screens. And that tongue is real. That's what a giraffe tongue looks like. That's crazy, man. I'm like, what in Darwinism had that come about? But really, so cool again to see these things. Also, I'll tell you one other thing. The farmhouse in the very beginning when Anna is running for safety, the whole second story was added with CGI. The silo was added with CGI and additional trees to make it a more lush landscape, a little more overgrown. Isn't that interesting? I think that's really fascinating. You can see why VFX artists are getting so frustrated because, they're like, you know what, just go in there and plus it. How do you want me to plus it? Just in any possible way you can conceive. Maybe put some birds in there, put some extra trees, maybe some flowers. And the VFX artist is like, so you want me just to animate this movie? And they're like, pretty much. So I think that's fast. This show isn't like that, but it's funny to see what they're doing and what they're plussing. And the VFX on this show have been excellent. Back to the season finale. So that was a little fun detour. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't show you the actual screen grabs though, because I don't want to get in trouble. But I have them, but it's funny. All right, back to the season finale. What did you think of the length of the episode? Again, I know it's going to annoy some people, but I think they could have done with just maybe 10 to 15 minutes more, maybe even 20 minutes more, but it all should have gone into making the hospital siege better. I don't think the hospital siege worked, and I'm curious what your reaction to that is because I think so many people were anticipating it because it's the moment, and again, this show focuses more on the emotion. But I think part of the reason they made the creative choice to mute that sequence was because I think Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, I'm filming this early. We'll see what they say in the interviews after the episode goes up. But I don't think they're Team Joel. I think they don't agree with the choice that he made, or at least they feel like it's so sad, right? I think again, I thought the sequence was shot to kind of vilify Joel. I mean, they should just let you make up your mind as to whether or not you think he did the right thing. But I think they were kind of telegraphing that you should feel he was wrong, and I'm like, he's not wrong. But I think the music choice that they made was awful, and I didn't like the cinematography choices. I was like, why do you keep cutting to Joel's boots, man? What's with the boots? And I think it took a lot of the energy and the horror out of the sequence. I also think the Fireflies have been depicted as so incompetent and unlikable up to this point. I don't think anybody watching was like, no, not the Fireflies. My thought was like, these guys are just a bunch of idiots. Right till the very end. Marlene even admitted in episode 1 that Fireflies don't know what they're doing. And she was a failure right to the very end. I mean, she really, again, bungled the whole situation and needlessly created a panic. I mean, she did a really bad job. You know who I miss right now? Maria at the commune. I can't believe it. I mean, by the way, did you realize the commune was that big? That's impressive. I'm like, wow, I have to say, you're winning me over to what you guys have built here, especially since I've seen the rest of the world. And it's pretty bad, as Joel said. He's like, I don't know if something bad's going to be out there, but so far we've been, it's been pretty clear. It's bad every time. But I was like, yeah, let's go back to the commune. I am team commune at this point. But I also have confidence in their ability not only to run their community, But I have more confidence in that they would know what to do with Ellie's immunity. I'd be like, let's go to Maria and tell her and let her in on our circle of confidence and ask her what she thinks we should do. I mean, she's smart, steady, reasonable, and effective. I think those are the qualities that she's basically the anti-Marlene. I was like, yeah, let's go talk to Maria. Anyway, I'd have played up the horror of Joel having to make that choice. Joel, I think he kind of wanted to be a different person and not be Dark Joel, but only Dark Joel could save them at that moment. And I think I would have at least maybe tried to explore that a little bit. And at least made it a more exciting sequence. Like if you're going to do the hospital siege, do the hospital siege, especially because, as I said, it's so iconic to the game. It should come across as an iconic cinematic sequence. If you didn't play the game, you'd have no idea that was the sequence of the entire game, right? I mean, here it just seemed more like an afterthought. So this show is just so interested in the human drama and emotion that not only have they moved away from the infected on this show, but they're even starting to move away from the human action sequences. You're like, man, take the time to choreograph and do this sequence right. You know what it should have been like? It should have been like in T2 when they had to invade the Skynet office. Wasn't that an incredible sequence, right? That was so good. That's what this should have been like. And it wasn't. But while this episode was lean, that didn't mean it didn't have any meat on its bones, especially emotional meat, as I said, this show's specialty. We had Ellie still reeling from her encounter with David, as I said, and Joel not knowing how to handle it. His idea to tell her about his own low point seemed to work a little bit, and then he followed it up with a great request for more puns. I was like, oh, he is doing a good job. That apocalypse joke was not only hilarious, but I like that Ellie was like, too soon, and I like Joel was like, no, it's topical. And I was like, I love it. This banter is fantastic. Why do you have to drive a wedge between these two wonderful people? And then again, this season, someone reacts to the idea, the scenario that someone they love has been or will be taken from them. And Joel, he decides to use all the tools at his disposal. Again, poor Tess in comparison. But to use I guess at that point, though, there was nothing he could do because she was bitten. But Ellie there is something that he can do. That's an interesting point. And the other instances, there was nothing he could do, but there was still time here. Oh, I like that too. So he uses the tools at his disposal to stop that from happening physically. But because of the choice that he makes, and I think I'm including in that to lie, while he stops it from physically happening, he does emotionally lose Ellie. That's also very interesting. And so I guess this works in the larger tableau of the show. But again, I wish they didn't have to do character assassination for Joel to do this story point. I don't like the way it went down. And I just don't understand why Ellie would be upset about it, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You might be an Ellie type person who, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective. And while we met the OG Joel last week with Troy Baker, this week we got to meet the OG Ellie, Ashley Johnson, who I thought did a fabulous job. Although, to be fair, she had a much better role than Troy did. She was so good. And she looks so much like Bella Ramsey. She really does look like her mother, like she's related to her. And you just felt like with these amazing shots into her eyes, like you were looking into her soul. I felt I really connected with Anna. I thought it was great. I thought it was really great. And it helped, I think, also that she got to play a shadow of Ellie, the character that she originated. So that was cool, too. Maybe, Troy Baker, he was stuck playing a totally different character. If only there was a way he could have played Tommy, Joel's brother. Maybe we could have seen a little bit of glimmers of the OG, the character there, too, instead of it feeling more disjointed. But this was great. This was a great cameo. And I thought Ashley Johnson was so good. I hope she gets more live action work off of this. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't hire Troy Baker off this show to do live action acting, but I'd hire Ashley Johnson. I thought she was fabulous. What a ponytail. She rocked an amazing ponytail. That she got to have those few hours with her daughter, I thought was, both heartbreaking and really sweet. And then we learned that Ellie gets her knife from her mother. I thought that was really beautiful. Although, why did Marlene just raise the child herself? Marlene! Right? I'm like, that was your childhood friend that you knew your whole life. And there was a baby version of her. I guess she maybe felt, but she hated Fedra. Why did she think Fedra would do a better job? Maybe she's like, one day that kid's going to turn and I want her as far away from me as possible. Marlene. And then we got one clicker for the finale. One clicker. But, at least there was one. But still, never the heights of episode 5. And speaking of the game, guitar shout out. That's going to make a lot of game fans very happy. That's very important going forward. And I also appreciated the Boggle product placement, which I don't believe is from the game. That is just from the people at Boggle. interesting choice for a game. I wonder if Neil Druckmann or Craig Mazin are Boggle fans, right? I'm not a particular Boggle fan. I'd be like, I don't want to carry that. You know how much noise Boggle would make carrying around now that I think about it? I'd be like, why don't you just tell everybody we're here? Why don't you just call it a death rattle game? But it was interesting. I was like, hey, let's go find a Target and see if there are any games left over. Is that one of the things people would ransack? There seemed to be a lot of stuff at the mall like that. But that was interesting. I bet they have games at the commune, and maybe we can pick some up on our way back. Also, nice callback to the kids drawing on the walls, with that underground thing that they found in Kansas City. But I was like, why pediatric surgery? Why, right? Ellie's not that young. I think they just did it to tug at the heartstrings and be like, oh, look, it's a children's operating room. And you're like, come on, man. I mean, you know what? I feel this game started out like early Pixar, but it's funny. It's like watching the evolution of Pixar or, de-evolution, depending on how you feel, of Pixar, but like in fast forward for The Last of Us, right? So it starts out Pixar-y, and everyone's like, I love the sophisticated emotion and that you're going there. But then some of us are like, it's emotionally manipulative. And everyone's like, no, it's not. But then as it goes along, you start to be like, I kind of think it is. And that's what's happened with Pixar. A lot of you come over to my camp. And Pixar, I think, has lost some fans because they've become manipulative and they've made choices for the effect rather than for the story. And I feel like that's what's starting to happen a little bit with this story. But, we'll see. I'm still excited for The Last of Us Part 2, and Season 2 has already been greenlit. I mean, they should definitely do it. The show is a big hit. And, I don't know. I mean, they've been ending a lot of HBO shows recently. They're like, this is it. The story's done. And I would respect them if they were like, yeah, it's two entries. And then maybe Naughty Dog will go on to tell another story that we'll adapt. But anyway, yeah. But the question is, for Season 2, should they continue to be faithful to the game, which I think has really won over a lot of people with this show and part of the reason it's such a sensation? Or should they take the opportunity to change the story because that second chapter was so divisive even as a game? So should they kind of maybe try and fix it a little bit? I did a poll in a recent live stream and the vote was 50-50. 50% said keep being faithful, tell that story as is. And then the other half felt that maybe they should tweak it a little bit and fix some of the mistakes that were made that did not go over well with a lot of fans. But very interesting. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that down below. A lot of interesting discussions here. And I think to some degree that's the real secret sauce of The Last of Us. It sure gets us talking. All right, so what did you think of the season finale? Share your thoughts on that as well. Are you Team Joel, or you think what he did was wrong? Share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.